What's up, everybody? Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick.
I'm Jammin John.
And we have an album review for you. Big shocker. Especially this week because apparently every awesome band wanted to release an album this week. And this is yet another one of those bands. We are going to go over the latest offering from Cosmic Putrefaction, Emerald Fires Atop the Farewell Mountains. This also comes out on the 4th of October on Profound Lore Records. This band formed in 2018 in Italy. This is their/his fourth album. It's a one-man project. Again, session musician, so it's a one-man project. Whatever. I have been a fan of this band for a while now with their second album, and forgive me, all their album titles and song titles are pretty long. The Horizons Towards Which Splendor Withers, became a big fan of that. We actually reviewed their last album, Crepuscular Dirge for the Blessed Ones, and this is just some absolutely chaotic, like dissonant death metal, almost kind of progressive and technical. Yeah. It's kind of like its own creature, but it definitely sounds familiar to other bands that I would say are their own creature, and we'll definitely get into those.
Yeah, I have roughly the same story. I got into this band with The Threshold of the Greatest Chasm back in 2019, and then of course we reviewed the last album. I'm not going to say the name again, but yeah, we reviewed the last album. I absolutely loved it to death. In fact, that's actually when I became friends with the one-man band Gabriel Gramaglia. I think I said that right. Gramaglia, whatever, I'm sorry. But yeah, and we talked for a while, and I've just been a giant fan of this band pretty much ever since. And Nick's right, it's kind of like a death metal casserole. Of course, it's all the things I love, dissonant and chuggy and atonal and dissonant, you know, those things. It's been a great band through and through, so I was super excited to hear this record.
So dissonant, you said it twice.
I did. Once, twice, three times the dissonance.
I was anticipating this one, and when I heard at least what I think was the first single, the title track, I was even more kind of stoked to go over this one because it introduced a lot of different elements, namely the fact that that song has clean melodies, clean vocals, and definitely explores a side of the band that I really haven't heard because, man, this band is a cacophony of just intense riffing, blast beats, layered atmosphere. It sounds hellish and like noisy and tormenting, but at the same time, it really kind of draws you in with its technical prowess and its use of like weird atonal melodies. Right from the rip, the opening track, Entering the Vortex Temporum Pre-Mortem Phosphines. I don't know what any of that means, but that's what happens when you enter the Vortex Temporum, apparently.
Yes.
What also happens is immediate insanity. You get a quick turnover and you are into just these heavy, dense tremolos and like weird ambient melodies behind the music. And right out of the gate, there sounds like there are a choir of demons circling around you, just growling in your ears. And the vocal dynamics on this album are actually probably some of the best they've done yet. In terms of like the production, the vocals seem like they come at you from different angles. Yeah. Sometimes they're way up front, sometimes they're in the back, sometimes they're just these creepy spoken words and whispers. And now you even have some clean vocals, too. And some of the vocals are actually done by Giorgio Trombino of Besserus, which I just wanted to throw that in there because Besserus is awesome.
I love Besserus.
And all of this is just sort of circling around Giulio Galati's intense drum work. Former Hideous Divinity drummer. This dude is an absolute beast. And man, this album, I feel like he really pushed himself with a lot of these like off-time rhythms, just nuts transitions on here.
Yeah, because everything is accented. Every single moment of these drum beats is accented, whether it's in a turnover, whether it's in a blast with an off-time hitch in the middle of things. I mean, Giulio's always been a really good drummer anyway. You know, we both are giant Hideous Divinity fans, and we're a big fan of his work, but, like, he doesn't give up. There's very few moments in this record where it's not some of the most intense, insane, off-time drumming that you've probably heard this year. And that's a bold statement, but it's wild.
Now with the last two albums, or at least the only two albums I've listened to, because admittedly I have not listened to the debut, I would say a lot of this band's sound is kind of comparable to, you know, there's definitely a lot of Morbid Angel. Blood Incantation is a big one too, which, I mean, props to these guys releasing this the same week as Blood Incantation. I don't know if that was a miscalculation or was on purpose, but I don't know, it might work. They might be able to catch the whole rising tide with that new album, because anyway, that's a totally different subject. We already covered it. But on this album, I feel like This is more focused on bands like Demilich and chthe'ilist, and probably to some degree like later Gorguts. This is packed with way more angular atonal riffs. The grooves are all like kind of off time, a little bit stuttered. And I would say this might be even more technical in terms of like transitions and such than the previous two.
Yeah, I guess some things I liked about the record before it, Crespuscular Dirge, I'm not going to say the whole thing again, but anyway, something I liked more about that record that isn't so much necessarily found on this record is that there was a lot more groove going on there. And while there are some grooves in this album, mainly in Daemonist Withdrawal and Swirling Madness Supernal Ordeal, there's not a lot of just like straightforward groove, because for the most part, the riff work in here is just a constant crawling atonal riff, whether it's ascending or descending, it's just all the time. I think that's, where the Demilich comparison comes from.
Big time. Like, this is like Demilich with more blast beats and decidedly more dense production. And the dense production on here is a big part of the sound, because there aren't like a lot of like isolated moments. Like, you do get some moments where you get like swells of synths or like an isolated drum and bass groove, or maybe just isolating a riff. But for the most part, it comes at you full force with every layer possible. And sometimes it is right from the rip. Like, I should greet the inexorable darkness. That was an interesting title, because, that seems polite. You should at least shake hands,
I do.
firm pat on the behind. Whatever the darkness wants. That song comes in blazing with just insane technical dissonant riffs. It's crawling, it's blasting. And then behind that you have like these strummed, like ambient guitar passages. There might be layers of synths. And again, since the vocals are very like multi-tracked and they're coming at you from all directions and constant blasting, and a bass tone that's thicker than a snicker, it just kind of comes at you like a wall of sound, and it is just intense. Like, this is just a really intense listen, especially in the first half of this album.
Hallways Engraved in Ether is kind of the same concept. Like, that's got a really wild start to it, and then it's just off to the races. There is a brief, like, stomping moment in there that kind of breaks it up, but really that's the only time that song's broken up, and it's just, like, there's so much going on that sometimes it seems to lose a little bit of its focus. Like, I love crazy, insane technical death metal. I love it. Even I get lost sometimes, and like that was a thing, especially in that song. And with that thick of a bass tone too, like it's suffocating.
But while it starts out like that, as the song goes on, it opens up and you get more like lush melodies. In fact, I really love the lead work on here. A lot of it is very, like, I don't know, like kind of soaring a bit. Like, it almost contrasts the just insanely dark, twisted music that is on a majority of this. And as the song goes on, like, the techie riffs become like a little less atonal and a little bit catchier. And this is also the first time you hear some clean vocals come out. Now, they're kind of more in the background, but there is like a melody to latch onto. And then by the time you get down to the next track, Swirling Madness, Supernal Ordeal, I think honestly is one of the most dynamic tracks on the album, possibly one of the most dynamic tracks this band has written. This one has a lot of just like really cool shifts that stand out. Like, it's not so much the cacophony. In fact, I would say that this demonstrates this band's ability to like show a little bit of restraint in terms of like, all right, we know it's heavy, we know it's intense, let's pull it back, isolate some moments, and kind of let the song breathe a bit. Yeah,
and that was something I noticed too, is it definitely has more breathable space. Like, it didn't feel like it was just eternally heaping corpses into a bag. It had some room to breathe, and the bridge on that song is really cool too. This is what I would call, I guess, more of the Blood Incantation moment, or at least newer Blood Incantation, like what we just went over. It's got a really cool isolated drum and bass groove, and it's isolated, and it's kind of funky, and the melodies going on it are oddly kind of brightish. Like, it's not bright, but it's not as dark.
Yeah, I mean, they're cleaner melodies. It's not so like bottom heavy, because this guitar tone is just bestial, but it's oddly melodic. It's still very dark and haunting, I would say, but again, that sort of melody that comes in, especially the lead, when that lead comes in, it comes in, again, rather soaring. And this and Hallways Engraved in Ether are probably some of the first moments where I really heard the synths kind of like come out to the forefront.
Yeah.
And how they're played, it's very just straight up proggy. Like, it's stuff you would hear on like prog metal or like prog rock in general. I don't know, I kind of liked it. It kind of, again, adds like a touch of brightness. Like, some of these synth passages on here reminded me of like Devin Townsend stuff.
Yeah.
And that man absolutely knows how to layer an album. But it's this whole second half, I feel like, is where like the dynamics really start jumping out, where you get like a lot of just complete tonal shifts in the music. And this kind of like shows like some of their most experimental stuff to date. And that is definitely showcased on the title track, which I see as a huge standout and kind of like gave me a completely different vibe about going into this album when I first heard it. It is notably more melodic, but melodic in their sense where it still feels like dark and ambient. And it comes in layered and it builds at a very like deliberate, labored pace. A lot of this album, every song seems like it just kind of shoots you like a gun into the cosmos, and then you're playing like Ricochet Rabbit off of every meteor, planet, everything. It's kind of nuts. This song, it's a little bit more of a slow build. It does eventually get heavy, but I like this slow build. The clean vocals, I think, really work well. It's got some acoustic melodies too, which is kind of unheard of.
Yeah. Acoustic melodies, chanted cleans. In fact, the clean vocals after they get through that chanting part are actually a little bit cynicky, which I wasn't expecting. It's got a nice, good, gradual build to it, and even when it does get heavy, it doesn't get so chaotic that you get lost in it. The whole song is just more of like a prog opus, so to speak, than it is the rest of the chaos that's on this album.
Yeah, it's like they pulled the reins back on like technicality, I guess you could say, but didn't pull them on creativity, because I think the song is really creative and it shows off a whole different side of them. Like there's stuff on there that I think is kind of comparable to like early to mid-period Gojira, and also a lot of Mastodon too. Like the dissonant melodies on there are particularly tuneful, and it kind of escapes the Demilich style riffs, because the Demilich style riffs in here kind of dominate this. Not that that's really a complaint. I love Demilich, but it kind of makes some of the songs run together. And one song in particular here, I feel like kind of teased this whole, mood on, the last track, the title track, but didn't quite fulfill it. In fact, it kind of just went apeshit towards the second half. Exiting the Vortex Temporum, which I guess exiting is more difficult than entering. Not in my experience. Anyway, the Clearing Path. That song is almost like a bait and switch halfway through, because it opens up with some of the most lush, pretty melodies, acoustic strumming. It's just this huge melodic sound. It doesn't really even feel that dissonant. The synths are huge. Like this is where like the atmosphere kind of takes over for a bit, and it just sounds like oddly pretty. And even when it gets into the heavier sections, it kind of maintains this nice groove and just, like these sinister descending tremolo hooks. But it kind of, stays on the rails.
Until you get to the second half where it goes right back into techie madness, and like, that's cool. But that song had real potential. The first half of that song, I think, is, in my opinion, one of my most favorite batch of moments of the record. There's a ton of different like slower grooves going on. Again, the melody, like you said, very pretty. It's haunting, but it's like a pretty haunting. Like it's, again, almost bright, but not really. It's got some gnarly descending tremolos in it. Like it gets real heavy and real pretty at the same time. But in the second half, it just kind of derails back off course.
I think I found multiple courses. Like it's got so many transitions. It is one of the most intense songs on here, and that is definitely saying something. It is going light speed almost throughout that entire back half. The fills and turnovers are absolutely nuts in that song. And the riffs, I mean, they'll hang out for a little bit, but not long enough for you to figure out what the hell they're doing, because it's just absolutely crazy. Now, to its credit, it does calm down towards the end, which makes for a pretty smooth transition to the title track, which in terms of like transitional atmosphere between tracks, I think this album does it pretty well, especially between the first and second track. I don't want to say full sentences anymore. So overall, this absolutely crazy, insane technical album does have sort of a smooth vibe in terms of like how the album flows.
Yeah, the pacing works well. They did a real good job on pacing.
And I like the fact that there's a difference between the second and first half. Like the tonal shift that happens pretty much in transition from Hallways Engraved in Ether to Swirling Madness, Supernal Ordeal. All right, I said another sentence or two. That kind of worked as a chapter break in the album, though. It lets you know that the second half definitely had more to show you, and again, was absolutely blown away by the title track. So overall, I'm going to give this 4 stars. I really dig this one. I really dug the last one, though I will say this one's different. Man, the production here is dense. Like this is like, the weight of a collapsed star. That's how much these riffs weigh. And that big prominent bass on here, But honestly, it kind of works for this. Like, it makes it sound more chaotic, even though some points it does get so dense where it's kind of hard to pick out the layers. When it does open up, you're like, oh, wow, that all does sound really cool. The songs, I think, are just creative and nuts. The drum performance is bonkers on here. But while I liked the intensity of the first half, it's that second half that really just kind of like got me, especially the title track and Swirling Madness, Supernal Ordeal. Those two are probably my biggest standouts on the second half. You know, and Demoness Withdrawal, I think, is an absolute banger too, because that's just straight up like Demolish sounding, and I love that shit. If you were a big fan of probably most of the bands that we already mentioned, but I'll say them again for prosperity here: Blood Incantation, Morbid Angel, Demolish, chthe'ilist, and definitely later Gorguts. Check this album out. This is really solid.
I'm going to go ahead and give this 3.5 stars. I did really dig this record. It is covered, in fact, steeped in dissonance and atonal melodies and harmonies and gross, nasty tremolos and all the things I love about death metal. Tons of crazy riffs, tons of amazing drum work. Julio, I don't know. I'm sorry if I butcher your name. I love you, brother. You did a great job, man. I thought the mix might have been a little bit muddy at times. That warm bass tone in contrast with the really nasty, crunchy sounding guitars. I don't know if it necessarily jived for me, at least at first. I did get into it more in the second half of the record. This is very, very busy, and in fact, maybe a little bit too busy at times, mainly songs like Hallways Engraved in Ether, which I thought there was a whole lot going on there. And the first track, Entering the Vortex Emporium, I'm not going to say the rest of it because I'm just not. I thought that track might have been a little bit too busy. I don't know, maybe it's just me. It does open up a bit more towards the back half of the record. Songs like Swirling Madness, Supernal Ordeal is just amazing. Full of gross, lurching riffs, and again, a lot more dynamic comes into play, and it slows down a little bit and it opens up a little bit more. Exiting the Vortex Temporum, The Clearing Path, the first half of that song whoops ass. And then the title track, of course, which is, I think, a really great thing for this band. It's something showcased that they have never really done before, and I fully support it. I'm curious to hear what happens next. But yeah, overall, 3.5 stars. If you want me to name off the bands again, once again, for prosperity, I will. Morbid Angel, Demolish, Phobophilic. There's some Meshuggah moments. There's some Blood Incantation. There's some chthe'ilist. Yeah, all of those bands that you love are found in this record. I recommend checking it out.
So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. Patreon, it's still floating out there because we haven't figured out how to shut it down, but we are on to memberships now. If you would like to help us out there, we have a membership option. It is only 99 cents. We don't have any extra tiers at this point. We're just trying to keep it simple at this point, mostly because we want to be able to afford to keep StreamYard because they're going to raise the prices soon.
Yeah.
Separate issue there. We will eventually be doing some members-only streams because that is the only perk I put on there. And, you know, I'm trying to be as inclusive as possible, and I figured that was just a good starting point. Either way, if you would like to help us, click the join button, and we also still have t-shirts, you know, both old and new, of course. Old ones discounted, new ones still the same price, even though they're not that new. And we also still have hats, and that is at thrallsmetal.com, which is also down below. So yeah, if you'd like to help us out either way, we would appreciate it.
Yeah. And as always, tons of stuff going on at Thralls of Metal still. Even though we're approaching the end of the year, we just don't quit, man. Album reviews, discography rankings, multiple talking forums, multiple live streams. We do States of Metal, is it not metal? What's John Jamming is going to come back? Nick's never-ending collection updates. We've got tons of stuff going on. And we keep going at this rapid-fire pace, all for you guys. We appreciate everyone that's a part of this channel. We love you guys. It's such a big thing for us. We can't believe we just hit 19,000 subscribers. That's nuts. Thank you. We couldn't do it without you.
Yeah, you guys absolutely rule. Tons of content coming your way. So one more big thank you because of how much you do rule, and it's a lot. And we will catch you later.